I'm trying to think, when I had the heart thing happen, where it's like, autonomous me dies back and understands, oh, we're all in this together on that deep level. And all the ecstatic feeling that lasted for months and months.
Months and months. Yeah. Could you talk about that? Bring that up again? Just
Well,
to,
I was just going to say, like, yeah, just that, I mean, the thing that pulled me back, I think I've talked about this to you, is that I had a friend who wanted to do a political show. This was like right before 9/11. And he wouldn't do it unless he had my blessing, and he wanted me to host it. And I really wanted nothing to do with any of this, but I also really didn't want him not to live his dream because I was by saying no. So I said yes. And that began a process of me coming back down to earth, was getting involved. And then 9/11 happened, and then it was like, okay,
oof.
so I'm back, baby. But this was before the big I am experience. This was the after the Kundalini awakening and after the heart, I mean, the heart awakening, I think I was literally on the subway in New York and just, and had that moment of like, oh, right, we're all in this together. Like my problems are not, there is no me with problems. There's humanity has problems. And every single one of us thinks we're alone with this right now. And look at us all. We're all like, this is ridiculous. And it just like struck me down. Yeah. And instead of like the depression you might intellectually think that leads to in some weird way, it was the complete liberation of like this blockage that is me, just like, poof. And then I could understand heart cultures and I could understand, that sort of thing. But if you have that and you don't have a culture to come back to,
yes, okay,
then how, I mean, do you, it's weird, like how do you sustain that? I suppose I could have. Like, would I still be there now if I didn't do the political thing? Would I still be like, would I be a completely other version of me that you wouldn't, nicer? A nicer version of me on the one hand, but on the other hand, who, like, I don't know. There's something about that character that might be grating on your nerves even more than I'm grating because then there's the sense of like, look, none of this really matters at all. And meanwhile, your life is shit. Like if your life is shit and you hear someone happy being like, none of this matters, it's all a dream, like that does you no good because you're in a nightmare and it feels really real.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something about that person that can't relate because there's no culture.
Yeah.
Like I said, like someone like Tiokasin understands us and understands him.
Yeah.
I think someone like that, like I was, maybe, first of all, I couldn't be understood by anyone I knew except other than I must have had a mental breakdown and this is it, or, midlife crisis or something.
Yeah.
So they couldn't understand me. And while I understood them, I don't know that I would have had the tools available because it wouldn't have dawned on me to care about having such tools you know what I mean? To be a useful communicator. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. No,
like how could I relate?
This actually
even though I could relate.
Okay. This was my second question, which I hadn't really articulated, but what in fact is that transition from the awakened, gloriously loving, happy person who recognizes and that transition.
And does that become narcissism without having the culture? Because obviously these nature cultures aren't all lovey-dovey either.
Yeah.
Right? Sure. Like that's because it's not new for them. Like they're born into it and they've been doing this for generations and generations. They've been this way. So it's not like a shiny new like feeling to understand nature as one. Like no shit, Sherlock. But so does it become? Here's the question. I don't know the answer to this, but does it necessarily, if I don't come back down to earth, become narcissism because I'm still floating around? Like I've talked about, like you're in balance. And there's no need for music. There's no need for art. There's no need for any of this stuff because you're not seeking to fill anything, and you are radiating. You're a free energy device.
Okay.
You're not looking for gas anywhere or electric.
Yeah.
But because you're living in a world of gas and electric, and you haven't been doing this long, you haven't been this way for very long, do you become just like this narcissist who's like, I do understand you, and you don't understand me, but part of my understanding is that because this is all an illusion and it's just part of your illness that I just had and just got over, because I know that and you don't, I'm not going to bother getting the tools to communicate this properly because it doesn't need to be. You just need to wake up. Does that sense of it become narcissism?
Yeah. Well, I would assume you'd get lonely. No, you wouldn't get. Would you get lonely?
Or do you get followers? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
is that what happens?
Yeah. See, yes. I mean, it makes sense.
You don't get lonely. I want to put this out there. You don't get lonely. Just like you don't need art. You don't need music. You don't need anyone. You don't need.
See, I'm very bothered by the fact that you say you wouldn't get lonely because
you wouldn't get lonely because you are love. That's what you're not seeking love from anyone, and so the love, you have compassion for people.
Did people feel it coming from you, or weren't you close enough to anybody to?
But because I'm not Eckhart Tolle or somebody, you know what I mean? They know Jeremy a day ago, and Jeremy a day ago isn't this Jeremy. So therefore Jeremy had a mental breakdown. He's not Eckhart Tolle. He's not. No. He's crazy.
No. So there was no one that you could. My question is, if I had met you on the subway or where in Central Park, and you were in that state of flow or whatever, would I have felt it coming off you? Would I have wanted to be with you?
I don't know. If you didn't know me, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, because that's one of the things they say about what was it? Awakened beings, that people tend to like being around them for no particularly articulable reason, and maybe that's why they gain followers, is because people just like to be with you. Because this guy,
I have a problem with that, though.
Yeah,
I hear it and I understand it, but I think I can't remember what I've told you and what we've conversed about versus every other public thing I've done. But seeing the Dalai Lama, did we talk about this? Seeing the Dalai Lama speak at Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, Jesus, no.
I saw the Dalai Lama speak at Radio City Music Hall, and I got nothing off of him, but the person who introduced him, I was like, holy shit, who is that? And my eyesight was really bad. I didn't have glasses, and I was sitting way at the back, so I just saw this glowing person with all the charisma in the world who seemed like the enlightened one introducing him, and it turned out that was Richard Gere, who I never liked as an actor and I always thought was uncharismatic in movies. He just seems like watching paint dry. But in person, he was like, holy shit, that's the enlightened one. And the Dalai Lama just seemed like a dude. So I don't know that the charismatic thing is certainly always been the draw of the charlatan too, and of the actor.
Yeah.
And actually, my wife has talked about this, just like seeing actors in New York. You see actors all the time, and they seem to have a glow about them. There are certain people that are stars, we call them stars for a reason, that seem to have that, whether they have any spiritual shine or not. So I don't know that the two are really as attached as we think.
Okay, so they're not necessarily attached. Yeah, I mean, so people who knew you the day before would say that you'd lost your mind, and you're not really thinking that you were being perceived by the man in the street as any kind of special person. You were and the reason I'm asking that is because if that's true, then maybe the narcissism is ready to develop because you don't have connection with other people.
Maybe, although now that you're saying that, I do remember I would walk down the street, and I still kind of do this sometimes, probably, just like I have a dumb smile on my face, and I think people liked that. Like I do remember people commenting, "Oh, you must be having a good day," or something like that. And it's like, no, I'm just, and it's true. I have lost my mind. Like that is what happened. I literally dropped my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so, because this goes to the question, what social good is your enlightenment? I mean, and I'm not that it necessarily has to have social good, but if the world were full of enlightened beings, no, I mean, but see, here's a kind of question that I think came up before in relation to my question about the nature cultures. So if you had walked then into a nature culture, you'd have just blended with the gang. Yes? I mean,
I don't know if they would have let me, but
but another way for me to ask the question is what accounts in your story as awakening to a Westerner, that's a bigger deal than simply being in a nature culture. I'm trying to ask about
there are certain things that I think it comes with, I don't know if you call it wisdom or knowledge, but certainly there are things that are apparent that were not apparent before in like looking at tribal paint or things on the body where it's like, before to me that was like, oh, that's decoration or something. And then after it's like, oh, they're painting out the lines of energy centers in the body. And, like there are certain things that you get that you're like, oh, okay. I see what they're doing.
Okay.
And yeah, I think like the type of shine you're talking about, like I think there's got to be a reason that Tiokasin and I became friends.
Yeah.
I'm certain he doesn't befriend every white guy he meets. Yeah. So yeah, there must have been a recognition of like, now that said, he would say that I am still stuck in my head, now he would say that. I didn't meet him back then, but he would say, and I would disagree. But yeah, so I mean, it's not as though he sees me and he's like, "Oh, you're Lakota too?" Like that's not going to happen. But I think there is the recognition of like, "Oh yeah, you're not exactly like the others."
Exactly like the rest of them. Is that the phrase that he uses? Not that you are stuck in your head.
Yeah.
Because that's a phrase that I have used about myself for a long time. And I recently discovered, I think, that's a sign of what the psychologists call dissociation. Either that or I've got that wrong. But the psychological part. But I've often
he says I think too much.
Yeah.
Overthinking it and all this.
I think there's a characteristic kind of. I should look up the literature because I may well be misusing the psychological terms. But from my point of view, what's wrong with me is that I'm constantly dissociated from reality, and I'm trying to escape from being inside my head to being out in the world. And you can't do that by constantly running that little windmill of internal self-reflection. That you have to break out of.
Right.
And you can't break out of it.
And it is hard to I found that like I understood a lot of what he was saying and he was articulating things that I couldn't, because I didn't have, but when we would talk about it on Paratopia, for instance, people wouldn't understand what the hell we were talking about, but I understood him perfectly,
Yeah.
So I think there's, I don't know. I find that interesting. There's something there. And there is a problem. Like if someone is thinking in terms of, obviously he's speaking to me in English, but his thought process is more pared down in terms of like thinking about self and property and all this stuff. And time is not, a straight line, but he's got to communicate in this way. Mm-hmm. It's just got to be frustrating. Like to me, it is. I did come to understand that English was a problem, you know, that the way the English language is set up is problematic.
I don't know if this is a footnote or if it's really important, but when I'm in full on, I don't even know what to call it, but when I'm doing analogical reasoning, that is to say, when I'm just free associating my descriptions of the world from Corbin's point of view with the angels and the animated beings all around you, which does intersect, at least his worldview does at least intersect with that of nature cultures. When I'm moving in those spaces and free associating, I very often get to the point where I recognize that in order to say the things that whatever is driving me wants to articulate, I can't use English. I mean, not that I suddenly realize I have to use ancient Greek or Lakota. It's just that there's no way to talk about these things if you're using nouns and verbs and you're operating in time. And therefore, I just kind of come up against it. And the point that perhaps the part of the point here is that you can't. So so stop trying.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one more thing to read from another listener if we're there. I don't know. Someone who goes by No Data on Blue Sky says, where does this begin? Okay. He says, to add to your listener reply, which was the ending of last week's episode. Did you listen to that, by the way?
I didn't get to it.
Okay. So he says, to add to your listener reply, yes, dear emailer, you think too much. Oh, hey, we were just talking about this. Yes, dear emailer, you think too much. The quote-unquote unknowable is not something you can intellectualize, Socratically debate, or write a thesis about. It becomes quote-unquote known, not understood, quote-unquote known of, when it is experienced. Nothingness is not void. It is no thing. No discrete particle, place, person, state, but within that void lies something, self. I am aware. I am now. I am. No memory of first kisses or favorite colors, no notions of here nor there, then versus now versus later, no quote-unquote you, whatever that is, only one impersonal thought, I am, alive, aware, now, thinking. And if you're wondering how to achieve that experience, my advice would be to die, because that's the only way I can think of to force the experience. Caterpillars have to do a thing before they can fly. Namely, they have to stop being caterpillars. So I just wanted to address this because I think the outline of it is, true, but this part I find a problem, which is within the void lies something, the self. And he's saying, or she, I don't know, is saying that this self is the I am awareness. But there's no you there in terms of like your memories, kisses, colors, notions of here or there, now or later. That isn't true. It's transcend and include. So it's like the mushroom trip. There is a point where the experience is happening, kind of like what you're talking about with the boga, I think, which is like, I can't really say that I'm there or not there. I can say the experience is happening of seeing and being the universe. But there are points where I know that I'm there, because there is a point where I'm worried that I'm dying and I can feel in my brain that I just left. By the way, I just left my body into this nothingness exploding into the universe. But I feel as though I'm having an aneurysm because that nothingness becomes something. The unconscious becomes conscious. And what it is the visual of a circle of clearness over black expanding, and I feel the elasticity in my own brain, and I think I'm having an aneurysm, I'm dying, and then it snaps, but instead of me dying, the universe explodes into existence out of a point of light. And then all of the experience happens, right? And so to me, the point is like the illusion is that you're, well, it's like leaving one sense of reality for another. So in time, there is the illusion that I'm leaving my body. And then when I come back, there's the illusion that I'm coming back. But once I'm out of my body, the tell that this is an illusion is that I feel my brain. All of this is simultaneously the case. I mean, that is the point of like nothingness exploding into everythingness, and that they are intertwined. And part of that is you. There's an aspect of you. So while you go through the motions of not existing, while you go through the motions of leaving your body and coming back into your body, the experience is of nowness, which includes you. The illusion of leaving is sort of called out within the experience. So, yeah, there is the impersonal I amness and all of that spirit which transcends and includes you, but includes you. So there is still you in the background going, what the fuck? A very tiny voice, a very dot of a voice going, huh? You know? And, you know, that might be something that, like, if I were born into a society that had the appropriate meditations and all of that, maybe that little me gets lessened or recontextualized somehow through training or whatever. But I would then also hasten to add that probably the training gets in the way of the experience ever legitimately happening. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because this idea that enlightenment or whatever, the nothingness experience, if you want to call it that, ironically, I guess, or paradoxically, the nothingness experience, that there is no little you is no, it's that there's no little you or big you. It's all you. You know, it's all, all of it is, it's all inclusive. Does that make sense? Am I saying that well enough?
Does it make sense? I mean, does it make sense?
No, I mean, if you're leaving your body, like let's put it in Jeff Kripal terms. There's the block universe. Like if there's just nowness, if existence is just nowness, but within that painting, well, I'll stick with my own terms. Within that painting, from within the painting, there's the sense of movement. There's the sense of space and distance and measurement and all that stuff. You step out of the painting, you realize, oh, that's just a painting. But as a detail in the painting, so as a detail in the painting, when you, quote unquote, leave the painting, of course, the person who is pulled back in looking at the painting, it's all one piece, right? The observer and the observed are one. So that's where the metaphor fails or the example fails, unless you think of it that way. Like the person looking at the painting, they are one. So when you step out of that operating system within the painting into I am out of the painting, it's the illusion of leaving. It's the illusion of leaving the painting. You're all still one.
Okay.
So, but you're different aspects of one, you know? Obviously, this one is big and impersonal and all-inclusive, and this is a detail in the painting. Okay. So to go from detail to big, all-inclusive, impersonal, and back has the illusion of movement, even though it's all one, because that's what the function of this part of the oneness is, the picture part. The function of that is movement, is time, is, you know, the movement of being, the doing. So that doesn't actually die. So even when I'm talking about the death of self, yeah, there's the moment of unconsciousness. And that's the scary part that, you know, from being conscious, we're all like, oh my God, I don't want to be unconscious. That's death. But the unconscious contains the consciousness. That's why you come back. That's why you're quote unquote resurrected, right? Yeah. So to deny that little self is also a misstep. to say like there's only the impersonal.
Yeah,
From
yeah,
the
okay,
impersonal
yeah.
perspective is not even true. From the impersonal perspective, there is the personal. That's all
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
It's actually ironically from the personal perspective that there's no impersonal. That's a god. That's bullshit. That's, I'm atheist. That's, oh no, I am that, but you don't really mean I am that, you know. This is how we trick ourselves. It's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
subtle.
Yeah. I mean, insofar, I mean, it seems to me that you were very articulate about those paradoxes. So, in that sense, I understand what you're saying, but it is
Yeah.
paradoxical all the way down. And that's what makes it so difficult to communicate because if you can't understand it, you can't communicate it.
Well, let's add this layer onto it because I feel like it is important to see like I feel like seeing all the barriers is like the defense against getting caught in them, which is I don't know anything about this person who wrote this, but I'm willing to believe that they experienced it that way, right? And I don't know.
Mhm.
Let's just say they. I don't know that they did, but let's say they did through meditation, through a plant journey, through however one comes about it. But I would say that that is an incomplete version or a version that comes from the universe itself, not from the dissolving of the universe into truth or whatever you want to call it, which transcends and includes the universe. Because again, this gets to my heretical notion that the universe itself is giving us false versions of this
Oh,
or
yeah.
partial versions of it. And that's just what happens. It's just what we do. It's just what the universe does. And then we think that that's it
Oh, no, wait
because
a
that
minute.
is
So
self-preservation.
that strikes me as something I'm not familiar with in you. in your yeah. So what you're saying is that it's quite common to get for the universe to spin out these partial awakenings.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think they
And of
come
course, you
from,
have no particular reason to know why that happens.
well, I mean, from within the painting, I think that people have, for instance, if I had this experience thousands of years ago and I told it to my disciples and they spread it and it becomes the religious thing, I think that's how it happens. I think when you don't experience it yourself, but you just believe in someone else's version of it,
Oh yeah, sure. No,
a
that's
la
right.
Carl Jung, of just like the universe responding and showing you the thing, and it becoming a common piece of the human stream of consciousness, and then you build a way to get there, a system to experience. But that's already in the field of the known, right?
Yeah.
Because I did it 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
So if I did
yeah.
something and you know about it, you can experience it. But I also think that like that's within the painting. Outside of it, where everything is happening now, that's always already happened. There was already me 1,000 years ago who already did. You know what I mean? Like, so therefore, also the future. There's already like whoever's done whatever in the future.
Yeah.
It's all affecting each other now. I think that's the part that's like, okay, this is science fiction gobbledygook.
Well, that's the part that my brain just goes totally dead on. The time thing. I mean, I'm not against it. I'm not denying it. It's just
I mean, I could be, if I'm wrong about that, fine. But I
yeah.
think like the basic gist of it is correct. Like that we experience something and and it sort of gets codified in the humans.
Yeah.
If it gets
Oh,
codified in
yeah.
the human
Oh,
psyche,
yeah,
it
yeah,
gets
yeah.
spit back out at us.
Oh yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and that's in my opinion, that's very much what Corbin was on about. That he had no patience at all for institutionalized spirituality. It just goes off wrong. It's got to be you. It's got to be you, and I find that. But the other thing that occurs to me among a gazillion other things, and yeah, is how do you know you're right? I mean, here's the following picture. So I got Jeremy here, and then I got all these other people that you're commenting on, and you're saying,
Hmm.
yeah, it's not quite right. It's not quite big enough because I've seen the big thing. Well, so I tend to have a picture of a bubble. There's a big sphere, which is you and what you're talking about, and then there's all these other people who either overlap with what you're talking about or inside it. And you're saying, yeah, I don't think that's the whole thing. I think that's one of these little illusory bubbles that the universe throws at us. How do you know that that whole thing with you too isn't a bubble inside? This goes back to that story, the story that Jeff told about the shrouded man. How do you know that your bubble isn't inside 5,000 other bubbles? Or
Well, it may be, but it's
but it's out of your
that doesn't negate what I've said about the other bubbles.
Okay, all right. No, it's perfect. That's perfect.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect.
I mean, to my mind, the only
totally
useful
legitimate answer.
the only useful way to even approach this, and for me anyway, is to point out. And if I'm wrong, then you'll know I'm wrong. But if I'm telling you something that transcends and includes
Okay.
what that thing is saying, then you got to see that, right?
Okay. So
That doesn't mean there's not something that transcends and includes me. I think that there is.
Yeah,
I think that there is
sure.
a multiversal thing going on that I have actually fallen from and been told that. I've been told as much. Like, oh, you're not ready for the next thing.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah, see, that's what's so disarming about you and also maddening at the same time is that you're so non-dogmatic. You're so flexible because but this is not a theory. This is just the way it is. And if somebody comes back to you and says, "Yeah, well, you're wrong for the following reasons," or no, they wouldn't say you're wrong. They'd have to say you are incomplete for the following reasons, and it wouldn't bother. My sense is it wouldn't bother you at all.
No, it would only bother me if they were wrong, and I could
And
point that out.
know? How would you know?
Well, I would know, and then I would point it out, and I would say, "Here's where you're wrong." And then because to me, it's like the people who say stuff like that.
Wait a minute.
I don't know from experience. They're just saying I read this about, for instance, Kundalini.
I mean, it has to be someone who's been an experiencer who's coming to you and talking to you and saying that, I've had an experience which supersedes or includes you, or are those not even the terms?
I mean, it could. Well, they might not be the terms, but I get what you're saying. I mean, if somebody were like that, that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how else to put it. I would listen.
How else to put it? Right, because you know what you know, and you're not threatened.
Yeah, no, I mean, not threatened, but also it's beyond that. There's no.
Yeah.
I mean, I've obviously got a sense of self and all that, but when it comes to this stuff, it's weird. It's like petty shit bothers me, but not the big. If the big stuff was you don't know anything, dude. You also don't know anything, and here's the thing. I'd be like, wow, you're right. I could still be blown away by things. I think.
Yeah, that's right. The petty shit bothers you, but not the big stuff. That speaks very well of you, I think.
Just in closing for me, because I'm still reading. I'm such a slow reader. I'm still reading this Carl Jung book, but now I'm at the chapter on visions. And right before this chapter on visions, getting to what we were just talking about with the universe creating things, he just talked about being in a Bastille, I think it was, or something, and with an acquaintance, not someone he knew way back when, not and is kind of friendly with. And seeing a bunch of paintings of Jesus and Peter, and it was 3 paintings, I think. And he had never seen them before. The other person had never seen them before. And he went on to do a lecture about them. He sort of understand what the symbolism was and blah, blah. And then it turns out he wanted to get them for his house. He wanted to get prints of them. And they don't exist. They weren't there. It never happened. And he's like, how is it possible that these don't exist and my friend saw them and has the same experience of them, but they don't exist? And so then he goes on to theorize or pontificate on how like, because of his essentially deep interest in all of this stuff, like, he projected it out in such a way that the internal becomes external and they both see it. And so they mistake the internal for the external. He starts talking about how this happens sometimes. The external gets mistaken for the internal and the internal for the external and blah, blah. And
Does he really say that? Gosh.
Yeah.
It's been a long
time. And what I don't get is, again, it's like, here we are. Here's a guy who's saying all the things. He's saying all the things, Tom. And yet he's still stuck trying to be a European scientist, being rejected by European scientists.
Yeah.
And it's mind-boggling to me when we sit here and we struggle with these concepts now, and it's all been struggled with before. Decades ago, it's there. And then the fact of that is, like, it's confounding because I don't know, I guess in my cantankerous aging here, like, I'm less concerned with, Teokas and Ghostverse would say proof, You're all trying to do proof. And it's like, I think that's where I'm coming to, is like, can't we all, and maybe we can't anymore right now in history because we have no sense of facts anymore about anything. But, like, back up 10 years ago, 13, 14, 15 years ago, there was a point when we could say, like, without poo-pooing all of science because of some fascist conspiracy theory we were given to poo-poo science, that, like, okay, science, great. But there's also, like, we experience things on the day-to-day level that science, as a quote-unquote objective, factual, whatever, doesn't actually reflect or incorporate or acknowledge. Can't we acknowledge that? And then when we do that, can't we come to something like Carl Jung when he talks about this stuff, or the more palatable synchronicities? Like, we all either experience paranormal events in our lives and quote-unquote spiritual events, or we know someone who has. All of us. And yet we're still tiptoeing around this and trying to wrap our tongues around the concepts that form the word. Like, what is this? Why are we keeping ourselves from ourselves for this air of, I don't know, scholarship that exists in the heads of a few people?
No. I mean, you sound like poor Jeff, who's been Kreipel, who's been who's been fighting this battle very nobly for a long time. And let me, I mean, I know both I know both sides very well. I mean, let me just bring it down, and this will be no help. I think that I have had scientifically inexplicable experiences. Nothing, no big deal, nothing like that story from Jung. But I've had little funny things, lots of odd synchronicities. And because they are ignored by the society in which you live, and because nobody ever mentioned any of those things growing up or anything, you learn to not notice them. I think that is very true of me. And it's only since starting to read Jeff and Eric Davis and then you, and it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that I start to notice little things that, oh gosh, little funny synchronicities that before either would have paid no attention to or would have just laughed at. And that's the little tiny thing, is that people can simply not notice stuff. I shouldn't mention this because I don't know anything about it, but I guess there's a very famous psychology experiment where they show a movie where there's like a gorilla walking across the road, and because the way they set it up, nobody sees it. It's that this is not real in the Western colonialist mind. It's just not real. And then if something does happen that's so unusual that people actually see it, well, it's just a one-off. And science only works if you've got a repeatable thing. If it's unrepeatable, scientists, for them, it doesn't exist. Because if you can't repeat it, it doesn't exist.
But it's repeating constantly. That's the thing.
Yeah, I
It's a
know,
life full of gorillas walking across,
yeah,
and everybody talks about the gorillas, but they whisper about it.
they would.
You know, if we whisper about
That's
it, it's not
exactly right.
real.
No, that's exactly right. That's what makes it. That's what's driven Jeff crazy for years now, and he's finally totally out of the closet with this.
And so I want to ask Carl Jung, if I may, and you can answer for him. Why are you a Christian? Like, my question to him would be, hey, Carl Jung, you just talked about an experience where essentially your God, in a very practical way, you brought forth something into the universe that you and your friend experienced in the room. What's your hang up with this, this Christian notion of how things are?
Oh no, but don't misread him as any kind of standard Christian. He does believe, but no, he doesn't believe.
Well, he believes in God outside of himself, right?
Yeah, yeah, he does. Yeah, does it? Well, I'm not sure that's right. I think he thinks
Exactly.
I think deep inside of all of us, there's this little God spark, which is, yeah. So he grew up in this Swiss Protestant, so he is Christian, and he does to the end of his life think that it's probably that if you're raised in that kind of culture, you're kind of stuck with those symbols. But as a theorist and a psychologist, he's not in any sense dogmatically Christian. And so his position is that I shouldn't speak as if I know Jung all that well, because I don't, but the divine is within you, and the God isn't necessarily.
But he still holds on to it, sort of protects the Christian notion. Like when he talks about
Christian?
going to India or going to whatever, it's all sort of collapses down into whatever his beliefs are. In the same way, well, or maybe similar, and maybe this is more in your wheelhouse, of like Henry Corbin or Ibn Arabi. Like, these are Sufi mystics, right? And Sufism is part of the Muslim tradition, but it's not. Right? Just like Christian mysticism is Christian, but not. Are they just staying in Muslimhood, even though they know bigger, because they don't want to be killed? Or do they really believe biblical stuff at that point?
See, for Corbin, and Corbin was not Muslim, nor was he quite Christian. What he was he was he was awkwardly none of the above and all of the above, and he got taken to task for that by some of his Muslim friends who thought, some of the so-called traditionalists argued that in the end all religions were the same, but in order to keep yourself from going off wrong, you really had to belong to one of them. Those are the traditionalists. And they said, you can't mix and match. That's not right. You can't be a little bit, I go to church and I also go to mosque and I also go pray at the Wailing Wall. You can't do that. It's just wrong. If you're going to have one, you got to have one. And it's okay if you're Teokas and Ghost Horse too. That's fine. In the Quran, the God says, to every people I have given a prophet, and so everybody's got one, but you kind of got to stay in your own lane. That would have been the traditionalists. And Corbin didn't have any. He thought that was not necessary at all. And he's perfectly happy to grab from the Christian tradition, the Muslim tradition, pick your favorite, Zoroastrian. He loved the Zoroastrians, because they're all essentially the same thing. And what unites them is you, because in the end, it will be you meeting your God. And that's yours and nobody else's. And and he didn't, and he sort of had an antipathy for any institutional religion for the kinds of reasons similar to the ones that you have, is that nobody can lead you to it. They can kind of they he had to say, yeah, you can kind of get pointed in a direction, and that's what the religions do. They kind of point you in a direction. But in the end, if you don't do it for yourself, then it's not right. It's
Well,
not
he's a little bit
genuine.
different because he's not. It sounds like he's not. He's from a culture that he can do that. But like Ibn Arabi
Yeah.
back in
Oh,
the
no,
day,
no. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
could
He's
he
more.
have not been a Muslim? Or would he be
Well, he
killed? Could
would.
could Christian mystics back in the day, would they be strung up as witches if they weren't like, but we're Christian?
Yeah, probably they would. Yeah. Sure. No. No. Sure. Because you've got to have the precisely right style of Christianity, or somebody's gonna. Yeah. So You got to conform to the strictures. Sure. There are all
So
sorts of
do you
people burned
know?
at the stake for being heretics.
Yeah. So do you know then? I don't know if you have the answer to this. Maybe I just need to try to speak to a Christian mystic or a Sufist,
Yeah.
Sufi. Um, why now? Like, why stick with the religion now when you're not going to be strung up? Maybe you would in other
Oh.
countries, but if you're in America, if
Oh.
you're in Europe, and you're
Oh.
Muslim, you don't need to be Muslim to be Sufi. You don't need to be Christian to be a mystic. And you know that those things are the part that are in the transcending and including. You're supposed to do away with the parts that aren't
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Where's
I mean,
that?
this, you'd get lots of different styles of answer. I think, there's lots of legitimate ways to honestly and with deep feeling answer that question. And here's one version of it, which comes just from me, because for a number of years when I was in deep psychic turmoil, I thought I might become Christian. And I realized, well, I can't become a Protestant because it just, nah, that's no good. And I thought for maybe Orthodox, like Eastern Orthodox, and I can do that. And then I thought, well, probably have to be Catholic, and so for reasons that would take a long time to explaining. And I tried that, and then I realized I just can't do that because I can't sign on to something and say, well, these are the things that we believe. But I think what kind of drives that has at least two components. One is just the community. It's just to have friends who share more or less your orientation towards the divine. And there's a lot to be said for um, adopting a long historical tradition, and there's a lot to be said for adopting rituals. There's a lot to be said for the structures of churches. Because we're all humans, and rituals can be really good for you. All indigenous peoples have rituals. I mean, it's just a thing that's like really good. And so you get community, and you get ritual, and you get singing, you get all that cool shit that comes along with it, rather than being a sort of isolated intellect looking for God in a godless world. It's not fun being one of the religious people in a secular world. You kind of want to have a few buddies around that share your vision. So that's one thing. But then the other thing, it's just reoccurring to me now, during that period of darkness that I worked my way out of miraculously by reading Henri Corbin. There was other things going on, but it was a very intense kind of reading. I began to feel, this would take a lot of explaining, so just trust me. I began to realize that I shared something with a long historical lineage of, in the cases that I knew of, they were early Christian monastics who had you read what they wrote, and man, these guys were in deep psycho-spiritual trouble. You know, they were really fucked. And they were asking God to help them. And it began to occur to me that I was part of a long, what they call the communion of the saints. Not there's no sense that I was a saint, but that I'm not alone in this profound suffering. There have been people that came before me, and I can read them translated into English, and it was like, oh, that's really sweet, man. And it's like, okay, I'm not alone. So there's community at the fleshy level, but then these long traditions of religions are just littered with suffering assholes like myself. And you look and you think, wow, okay, it's not just me. And see, I think that's one of the things that comes along with being a nature culture and in one of those communities, you know. But when you grew up as a non-Protestant in a non-Protestant secular culture, and you've got these issues which we call psychological, but which are really deeply religious, you feel you're alone. And so it makes great sense to join a church, except I'm not I can't do that because I don't know what I believe. I'm not a Christian. I don't know. Apparently I'm a Gabonese Bwiti taker. I mean, I don't know what is that about. Um, but there's, I'm making the argument there are a lot of really good reasons to belong to a tradition. I
Okay.
personally can't do it.
Well, maybe that is the place to leave it.
Yeah, yeah. Don't get me started. You know, it's always a problem.
Well, thanks for once again
Yeah.
suffering through my
Oh, yeah. No,
trying to
no.
wrap
Thank you.
words around things that nobody
Yeah. Yeah. No,
understands.
I always find it useful. It's astonishing to me that anybody would listen to us, but if they do, God bless them.
They do.
It's fantastic.